It had been just over 6 months since the Dread Citadel Naxxramas had opened in vanilla World of Warcraft, pouring the forces of the Scourge across Azeroth. Many had tried and failed to quell the vile undead, yet the rumour, the whisper of a new expansion kept eyes firmly on the horizon, eagerly anticipating more information, more news, anything about what on earth would come next. And players didn't have to wait too long before that news came. On the 9th of January 2007, the Dark Portal opened for the first time, and on the 16th of January 2007, the most popular MMORPG to ever exist launched its first expansion, the Burning Crusade. This led players totally off Azeroth into an entirely new world, Outland, a world far more focused on an alien setting, and for once we were not waiting to be attacked on our homeworld, we were taking the fight back to them. The hype levels were unreal for this moment to come. Vanilla had lasted a little over 2 years in length, 2 years of tuning, perfecting, and building a community around this game. This was a time when attitudes to gaming and culture were just so different. It was more weird, it was nerdy and unusual, and it was brilliant. This expansion sold nearly 2.4 million copies on its first day alone, making it at the time the fastest selling PC game ever, and it would go on to sell approximately 3.5 million copies in its first month. 2007 was, of course, still in the era of hard copies of games, making events for new expansions become nests for Warcraft fans overnight. Thousands of Azerothians would crowd together to share a love for a game that had brought so many people together online all over the world, now in real time. And looking back, it's hard to wish that this were not still more of a thing compared to our, yes, more convenient, but also seamless and a bit more soulless digital rollouts that we've become accustomed to. Nevertheless, at the time, the preparation was done. The game was installed and updated, your character was ready, your gear was repaired, food and water in your inventory, gold at hand. Your body was ready, and valiantly you ran through the blasted lands towards that towering green portal, ready to take the first step, the first taste of the next 1,000 hours to come, and nothing. You ran into the wall behind the portal and then you disconnected. Repeatedly, and that's if you were on a PvE server. If you were on a PvP server, you did the same as that after running back to your corpse several dozen times in a row. As it would turn out, sending every single player in the game to the exact same point to load through a portal at the exact same time had some rather negative bottleneck effects. Maybe Blizzard just underestimated their player base once again, as they had done with AQ40's opening, or maybe it wasn't even possible with technology back then to release the expansion in this fashion and avoid this problem. But in any event, it certainly made it memorable. Maybe for some of the wrong reasons, but still memorable. And you may think Blizzard will learn something from launches like this, and you would generally be right, until they sort of forgot this kind of thing happened and sent everyone to garrisons during Warlords of Draenor, but let's not get into that. Nevertheless, we are finally through the portal and into our brand new world. So what does this world offer? Content galore. New challenges, new abilities, new... Wait, was that guy over there just flying? Okay, I reckon this is gonna be pretty amazing. Let's talk about what the Burning Crusade brought to the world of Warcraft. But before we go on, a quick word from today's sponsor, Boot.dev. Boot.dev is a platform that aims to equip you with the skills to get on board with a career in back-end development through interactive lessons and learning. It stands out by taking you on this journey in a more interactive way, as though it was an RPG with experience, leaderboards, achievements, and so on. Boot.dev offers self-motivated individuals the tools to get fully on board with the Python and Go programming languages, and it does this through hands-on learning, where you're going to be writing tons of your own code so that you can get a grasp of the fundamentals from the basics onto more advanced lessons. And Boot wants to set you up with these fundamentals and encourages you to really take your time and understand each point, rather than just trying to rush you through the course as soon as possible possible, so you'll be as well equipped as you can be for your future job search. Speaking of which, careers in this field are often remote, have very solid earnings, and you can start this today at your own pace. If you want to find out more or check them out, click the link in the description box and use my code WILLE to get 25% off your first month, or even your entire first year if you choose the annual plan. Many thanks to boot.dev for the sponsor today. Let's get on back to WoW. Upon landing in Outland, initially players may have thought, how is this continent going to last us for the next few years? It is, after all, a major downgrade in size from Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms. Those totaled around 40 zones collectively. Outland by itself has 7, but sometimes less can be more, or in this case, had to be more. Zone design was fuller and more fleshed out. The advent of quest hubs have really grown into the game, and each zone had a few areas where quests were picked up en masse, whereas in vanilla there were only a selection of places like this, such as Booty Bay, Thorium Point, or Marshall's Refuge. Gone were the days of finding quests where an NPC in the Undercity would just ask you to casually pop over to get some mushrooms from Loch Medan or something. Outland was much more linear in its approach, and the developers didn't expect you to hop frequently between different zones, but progress from one to the next. Hellfire Peninsula into Zangarmarsh, into Terakar Forest, then Nagrand, and so on. And each zone really stood out from one another. Having around 40 zones in vanilla was great for making this huge epic world. You plan your journeys and it felt like you were embarking on something after you left the capital. Just picture those first trips down Stranglethorn Vale or on a journey through the wetlands to get to Ironforge. But during that time there was also a lot of, well, nothing. A lot of filler space where not a lot happened. Kind of like real life. With 7 zones to play through in the Burning Crusade, this wasn't nearly as much the case comparatively. The world was packed. Nearly every zone had multiple instances or indeed raids inside of it, and each zone was so immediately distinguishable. The atmospheric effects and the skyboxes and colours all changing from one area to the next like night and day. You have the eerie red of the Hellfire Peninsula with its dark skies and shattered landscape, then for a swift respite in the boggy greens and purples of Zangarmarsh with its towering mushrooms and bioluminescent flora, creating an otherworldly beauty unlike anything we saw in Azeroth. Over to the green and vibrant fields of Nagrand, the last unscarred region of this version of Outland, with floating islands and grassy plains as far as you can see, reminding you slightly of being back at home, but distinctly being alien at the same time. Then onto the jagged, treacherous peaks of Blade's Edge Mountains, before ending your journey in the stricken and desolate Shadowmoon Valley, or then again maybe Neverstorm. Some zones even went as far to really promote a new feature of this expansion, flying, and some key farming spots, quest hubs, or even raids needed this skill to access them. Areas such as the floating islands and ethereal platforms of Neverstorm, the Netherwing Legend Shadowmoon Valley, and Sketis and Terakar Forest were all built with flying in mind. But don't worry, we're going to be talking more about flying later. On this new world we found ourselves with 2 new races, one for the Horde and for the Alliance, the Blood Elves and the Draenei. And did you know there wasn't any race change functionality back for Blizzard during TBC? Race changing through the shop wasn't a thing till midway through Wrath of the Lich King. Still, I think the main attraction for these races was the fact that faction-specific classes were now gone. Something did get lost in this process, I think that's true, but Blizzard did however try to keep a semblance of there being a difference between these two factions by introducing new spells. Shamans on the Horde got Bloodlust and Heroism on the Alliance. They both did the same thing here, they always have. The difference is one is red because Horde are red and angry, and the other is some floating hammer thingy, very heroic and Alliance-like. On top of that, Alliance Paladins got Seal of Vengeance, which is a stacking damage over time effect, and Horde Paladins got Seal of Blood, which dealt damage to themselves but hit enemies very hard in return. Of course, this meant that back in the day, Horde Paladins were significantly better when it came to dealing damage than Alliance ones. However, this was an area where Blizzard rewrote history by giving both factions both seals in TBC Classic over balancing concerns. There wasn't only this, but we also had a new profession enter the game, and honestly one that feels so core to the game you could have almost sworn that it was part of vanilla vanilla, jewel crafting. This added a new level of intricacy to completing your ideal item set, and jewel crafting certainly went a long way to completing those hit and expertise caps. Expertise is also a new addition, a brand new stat. Expertise rating reduced the chance an enemy had to dodge or parry attacks. However, these things weren't just full percentages on gear anymore, as things were in vanilla. Instead, it was converted to a rating, which would then become a percentage, and this rating could be changed by the gear from your stats, talents, gems, racial bonuses, procs, and of course enemies level. All in all, it's just something that pretty much every class had to deal with in time, and a number that you had to keep in mind. And as we leveled up through this new world, our characters got access to new iconic abilities. Many of us got brand new abilities every 2 levels, as well as extra ranks of our core spells. Some of the abilities brought in by TBC added a new level of skill and gameplay that just set you apart when used correctly. Here's just a few additions. We have Spell Steal for mages, Cloak of Shadows for rogues, Heroism for shamans, Spell Reflect for warriors, and not only that, but every single talent tree in the game got a new end of talent ability too, such as Mutilate for assassination rogues, Unstable Affliction for affliction warlocks, Totem of Wrath for elemental shamans, Summon Water Elemental for frost mages. The list goes on, and pretty much every single class got something amazing. And you know what the best bit about all this was? Classes were just that little bit more balanced than they were in vanilla. It wasn't just the case that if you ran up against a certain class you're gonna lose every single time. Sure, let's not get too rose-tinted here. Mages and rogues were still absolute monsters in 1v1s for examples, and warriors were great in groups, but you had specializations like Shadow Priest, Enhancement Shaman and Balance Druids that could actually play the game now without running out of mana in half a minute. Healers started to work their way into their niches, Paladins as tank healers, Shamans as incredibly strong group and raid healers, and priests and druids were a little bit of both. And Blizzard implemented many group or raid-wide buffs to many specializations to make them more of an attractive option to bring along to your raid. Gone were the days of certain specs being a full-on meme. Retribution gained improved Seal of the Crusader, increasing the chance the target will be critically hit by 3%. Shadow Priest gained Vampiric Touch, giving your group very strong mana regeneration. Enhancement got Unleashed Rage, buffing your party's attack power by 10%. Moonkin Aura was buffed from 3 to 5% spell crit. I could go on and on about all these new bonuses. And you better believe all this new power was put to good use when it came to end game content, of which there was an absolute load. So let's talk about the raids. First of all, let's address the downsizing. Raids in vanilla were 40-man epic affairs, sure, but often more of an exercise in coordination and preparation than anything else. In the Burning Crusade, Karazhan and Zulaman were 10-man, and every other raid was 25. Also, that pesky debuff cap was raised up to 40, making it much more attractive to bring a wide variety of classes to help your raid out. The debuff cap itself wasn't fully dropped until Wrath of the Lich King, but 40 made it effectively not a number you had to worry about anymore. Of course, we ended vanilla during Naxxramas, which at the time was a sheer wall of pain and impossibility for the vast majority of guilds. Naxxramas wasn't just a step up from AQ, it was an escalator all the way from the 1st to the 30th floor. Many guilds who even saw the inside of this place after a tuning maybe only cleared 3 or 4 bosses in the easier quarters, with the military and construct quarters having far too big of a barrier to entry in Razuvius and Patchwork. Though in the Burning Crusade we had a whole lot of raiding content, which was released over the expansion's duration. At the start we had tier 4, which was Karazhan, Gruul's Lair, and Magtheridon's Lair 2. Karazhan is arguably one of the most memorable raids ever and an absolute crowd favourite. It was just so creative. No longer were we in some dark or dank halls of a dungeon. This was a majestic tower clinging on to the past that had long since surpassed it, and it was such a magical place. Spread across multiple floors, the raid took you through an opera house where you'd face down characters from classic stories, a ballroom filled with undead nobility, a massive library overseen by the curator, and even a game of chess come to life. Karazhan was so popular it was later reused in Legion as a 2-part dungeon. There were some more challenging bosses too, such as Nightbane or Netherspite, and it all ended in a battle against an Eredar Lord Prince Malchezaar. Following that was Tier 5 with Serpent Shrine Cavern and Tempest Keep. Lady Vash awaited in the depths of the Coilfang Reservoir, surrounded by her Naga forces, whilst Kael'thas Sunstride awaited all the way at the end of Tempest Keep, the latter featuring the infamous 5-phase encounter, as well as the incredibly rare Ashes of Alar mount. In TBC, these raids weren't just big dumb dragons, which if somebody accidentally over-aggroed, they would turn around and one-shot your raid. Mechanics were introduced to encourage responsibility, positioning, cooldown usage. These are core elements of raiding moving throughout so many different WoW expansions. In Tier 6 we had Mount Hyjal and the Black Temple. The battle for Mount Hyjal had you defeating waves of enemies and gradually progressing up to Archimonde. Definitely not one of the best well-remembered raids, but I suppose a cool idea in theory for fans of the RTS games. Whereas the Black Temple was an absolute icon of the expansion and had so many memorable encounters. You had the Reliquary of Souls, Terran Gorefiend, where people always ask, what do I do with this extra action button that's appeared? Mother Shiraz, and of course the Betrayer, Illidan, Stormrage. And that fight atop the Black Temple was a moment that people had been waiting to see for years. Shortly after that, Zul'Aman was added, a troll-themed raid that featured a timed mount run. That was if you could rescue all 4 captives before they were sacrificed, and that mount would be the coveted Amani Warbear. The gear from here also bridged the gap between tiers 5 and 6, making it an excellent catch-up raid for guilds still progressing or returning players. Once again though, just like Naxxramas, we ended the expansion on a serious difficulty spike, with the final raid being the Sunwell Plateau. The Sunwell itself was unrelenting. Few raids even got past the first 3 bosses of Kalagos, Brutalis and Felmist, only to find the Aradar twins waiting, as well as one of the tightest DPS checks to ever have existed at the time, and that was Muru. Here pretty much every member of your raid would go leatherworking to rotate drums of battle so you could have the buff for the entire fight, and then at the end was the battle versus Kil'jaeden to very much decide the fate of the world. But you didn't just walk into most of these raids. Oh no, you thought a tuning in Classic took a while? Well, think again. So let's get into Karazhan, shall we? So there are 3 introductory quests to complete. After that you'll need to do Mana Tomb, Shadow Lab, Steam Vault, Botanica, Mekanar, Arcatraz, Old Hillsbrad Foothills, and the Black Morass before being attuned. And that's just for Karazhan, by the way. In fact, here's a nice, simple graph for you to digest about all the attunements in Burning Crusade. And you know something which I do like about this? It's that your main matters. When you log in, the chance you have something to work towards is very high, at least at the start of the expansion that is, and you can put time into that one class. And if you're a real madman, you can run it back and do it all again on an alt. One dungeon leads to the next and everything adds up. Reputations matter, heroic dungeons matter, raids lead to the next raid. It's like one big ladder all the way to the top, and it's a system that keeps you going and going. Everything was very much interconnected, and it created a sense of genuine progression and achievement within the game. There was also the sheer difficulty jump from normal to heroic dungeons. Normal being pretty chill for the most part, designed for leveling players. Heroic though, oh boy, these new mechanics and severely beefed up mobs were going to be a serious challenge. Tanks would need a ton of gear before they could really stand up to enemies, and oftentimes you'd just have hunters putting down traps or mages casting blizzards so you could run back and kite your way through. And back in original TBC, you best believe you were using CC. You absolutely had to bring along CC. Sometimes you'd have a pack of 5 mobs and you're gonna have to CC 3 of them, or somebody's gonna get one shot. Mages with polymorphs, rogues with sap, hunters kiting back into traps, priests with shackle undead. All of these abilities were really important. This did make it a bit more limiting who you could bring along to dungeons too. I remember doing many runs of Magister's Terrace Heroic on my Shadow Priest after that trinket from the 3rd boss. And what I did during most of the trash packs was I just mind controlled an enemy mob because it was going to do way more than anything my character could do individually. Retrospectively, I'm not entirely sure I was correct doing that, but hey, I thought I was doing the right thing, and that's all that matters. These trash mobs hit incredibly hard. They would kill clothies in 1 or 2 hits if they pulled aggro, and boss encounters added new abilities on Heroic as well, which weren't present in normal mode, requiring players to relearn these fights to some extent. Shadow Labs was notorious for its difficulty and it being awkward in many places to pull trash cleanly. Shattered Halls with its timed run was seen as a rite of passage, and who can forget a good old run through the Blood Furnace, which I think you can only imagine how much more difficult that would have been back in the day. This step up in difficulty was well rewarded though, with bosses adding epics to their loot tables and each boss dropping badges of justice, a currency that you could use to purchase epic gear from vendors in Shatrath. This badge system was revolutionary at the time, giving players who couldn't commit to raiding schedules a path to obtaining quality gear through dedication and skill. Blizzard in TBC were absolutely testing just how far they could push players in PvE content, and the answer was pretty far, but PvE wasn't the only endgame activity that had grown significantly. We got a new battleground, the Eye of the Storm, which kind of reminds me as if Warsong Gulch and Arathi Basin had a baby, having elements of both capturing points and flag carrying. I have strong memories of priests and mages floating down with slow fall or levitate to the flag in the center, and warriors happily running off the ledge at the start and then complaining about not getting healed. I guess some things never change though. But the real highlight of PvP and TBC were the arenas. This was a far more competitive and skill-driven form of PvP, and remember back then there were no rated battlegrounds, and the ranking system from vanilla had ceased to exist. Sure, you could still pre-made, but most of the time you actively didn't want to go against other pre-mades to maximize your honor gains. An arena was the fire where PvP legends were forged in 2s, 3s, and to a lesser extent 5s. This is a place where people who wanted to PvP competitively could PvP, and when it came to getting gearing from this system, it was also way simpler compared to how things were from ranking. Casual to more hardcore players could gradually work towards different levels of gear throughout each season. The guys with the best gear in the game didn't get there because they ran down to Drekthar for 12 hours a day, or because they could semi-AFK in battlegrounds for months on end. They got to the top because they were just damn good at the game. There were still meta comps back then, such as Rogue Mage Priest, which I feel has been evergreen throughout the years in World of Warcraft's PvP scene, but Arena gave individual players the chance to show off teamwork and their own skill. And there were 3 arenas too. Those were the Ruins of Lordaeron with the tomb in the middle, the Circle of Blood in Blade's Edge Mountains, which didn't have ramps up on either side back then either, making that bridge area much more strategic, and the Ring of Trials in Nagrand. And ever since arenas have been a thing, they've been the biggest indicator of who's the best, and there's such a big reason why. You can now prove your skill on an even level playing field match after match, with the growth of your rating reflecting your true abilities rather than just time investment. There were also battle groups back then, as people were grouped up cross server. These were clusters of servers where people would play against each other in arena, and being on a very competitive battle group was an extra level of prestige to this system too. With all that said and done, TBC even at the time was not without its criticisms, so what were they? Well, TBC did introduce gameplay elements and mechanics which people have taken issues with certainly, such as for example the old tale of I don't like instantly replacing my epics with questing greens in a new expansion. Now personally, I don't mind a jump up in items because it happens once every few years in this era instead of every few months as it currently does in retail, but I'm not all aboard with the idea that people replace all of their epic items straight away. So let's have a look at some quests in Outland and compare them to some gear from early on in vanilla. For example, here I have my Azure Song Mage Blade and the Exalted Buck from Alterac Valley. This is a nice combination going into Blackwing Lair, which is content from pretty much towards the beginning of vanilla. Now let's find a quest in TBC where I would replace these items. Spoiler, there is no quest in Hellfire Peninsula that would upgrade my items. In Zangarmarsh we do have a candidate for a main hand replacement in Terakar Forest from a level 65 quest, and a more definite upgrade from a level 66 elite quest in Nagrand. The thing is, Azure Song Mage Blade is a Molten Core item. It's a really good Molten Core item, but it's a Molten Core item, and realistically in TBC, if I have to wait until I'm halfway through Nagrand for an upgrade to this Molten Core item, I would say that's pretty good mileage from the Azure Song Mage Blade, to be honest. And if you're in Naxxramas gear, considering your your tier set bonuses and enchants? Well, as we now know, you ended up using that gear well into raiding during TBC, so I think the argument of replacing your items straight away is people coming into the game with really bad epics and being upset they're being replaced by green items. The Burning Crusade also brought daily quests into the game, that ever dreaded term. In Classic there were things which resembled daily quests. There was the blue exclamation mark, but these were repeatable rather than daily, so you could just spam them as much as you wanted. However, in TBC there were way more reputation dailies, such as Ogrillar or Netherwing for example. You could see it as the start of daily quests gradually encroaching into the game. Generally speaking though, this content was by and large seen as a good thing back then, especially when it ended in epic rewards such as the Nether Drakes or the Nether Rays. These flying mounts became status symbols showing your dedication and time investment, and when other people saw them they wanted to go and do that grind as well. But above all, in TBC the difference with the daily content is that it was not mandatory for raid progression. These weren't giving you some kind of incremental power increases. Sure, there were some items behind reputations which you did want early on into raiding, but you didn't have to log in and do these dailies every single week just to keep up, as Blizzard made the mistake of doing in future expansions. So in that regard, I think the daily content was really fine in TBC. On top of that, achievements could also be seen as a bit excessive, or maybe a bit more than excessive, as well as discouraging for anybody who wanted to roll alts. But at the same time, if there's so much to do on your main account, wouldn't it just be better to focus on that than trying to roll half a dozen alts? It did create an environment where your main character felt important, where their progression mattered. And of course, as we now know, Blizzard would also end up lowering achievement requirements throughout TBC, so you could get into raids easier on alts. Which I suppose finally brings us to flying. Yes, this can of worms. Talking about flying is like talking about LFR, isn't it? Everybody's got their mind made up at this point in time, but still I think it can be very polarizing. Keep in mind though, at the time, flying was absolutely amazing. You may think that in expansions to come it harmed the game in various ways, and we can talk more about that in future videos, but during the Burning Crusade it was really well received as a whole. In fact, the main problem people had back then was affording flying, especially epic flying. You see, regular flying was hardly going to break the bank for many players, and the way riding skill was bought changed in TBC as well. No longer was the skill cheap and the mounts expensive, but instead the other way around. Regular flying being 800 gold and the mount 100. This was 60% both land and air speed, and trust me, 60% airspeed felt absolutely terrible. It was raised to 150 in Wrath. Epic flying though, as it's called, was epic in terms of how expensive it was. The mount was 200 gold and the training was an enormous 5,000 gold. These mounts were 100% ground speed and 280% airspeed. This made epic flying into a badge of prestige for a player to have earned that sum of money. And there were some mounts that were 310% speed even back then, such as the rank 1 mounts from PvP, as well as Ashes of Alar. But let's talk about the criticism you hear these days. Flying quickly killed world PvP, at least that's the claim. For the cost of about 900 gold, you could become nigh uncatchable as soon as you hop on your mount and cruise off into the distance. Most classes can no longer touch you. You can fly straight into instance entrances without having to fight your way there too, and if you're ever outnumbered, you just fly away. Easy. If you want to grief somebody who doesn't have flying, it is so simple to do. Saying that, I think many people have soured a little bit towards the idea of world PvP since Phase 2 in Classic, or now having played Vanilla many times over. However, as much as people may have enjoyed flying back in original TBC, I think we have to be able to understand the downsides too. Secondly is that it made the world seem smaller. Getting around was so much faster, and you no longer needed to interact with the world around you as you just flew past everything to where you wanted to be. You could get straight to that herbal mining node, across bodies of water, right into raid and so on. This was, and still is, probably the biggest convenience factor Blizzard have ever introduced to the game. It made so much in the open world easier, and there was even content where it was required from quests, farming spots, and areas such as Skatis, the Abyssal Shelf, or Tempest Keep. There is a lot of good and bad in flying, even by today's standards, and honestly I really don't mind it that much. Don't get me wrong, I see the issues with flying, but it's really just a case of it is what it is for me. However, all that said, it is worth noting that in TBC originally, flying felt like such a big progression reward. You earned it, you paid for it, and it opened up so many new areas of the game that were specifically designed for it. Of course, we just treat flying as part of the game, which is standard now, but here's where it all began. All in all, the Burning Crusade brought a massive amount of content into the world of Warcraft. Much needed balance, more filled out classes, expanded the endgame, added new difficulty levels. It was overall an enormous success for Blizzard, and the player base went absolutely crazy for it. The Burning Crusade was near the peak of World of Warcraft's subscriber count, and at the time of TBC's announcement in late 2006, the game boasted 7.5 million subscribers worldwide. By January 2008, as the expansion matured, that number had now climbed to over 10 million subscribers globally, with the game now recognized as a cultural phenomenon. And at its peak, World of Warcraft was only ever surpassed by one expansion, and that would be the one to follow it. But beyond the numbers, the Burning Crusade represented something more. It showed that Blizzard could successfully expand the world of Warcraft. It had tighter raid sizes, meaning more guilds could experience endgame content. The introduction of badge gear meant casual players had paths to progression. The heroic dungeons provided challenging 5-player content for those who wanted to test their skills, and the arena system gave competitive PvPers a proper stage to prove themselves. The expansion refined systems that vanilla had established whilst adding meaningful new layers. It took chances with flying mounts, a new profession, faction neutral classes, daily quests, and I think most of them paid off long term. Not everything was perfect. Achievements could be daunting on your alts. Some daily content felt as though it became repetitive, and the flying debate would echo through expansions to come. But in the moment, in 2007 and 2008, the Burning Crusade was absolute peak World of Warcraft. Looking back now years later, having replayed it now years later, it's easy to see why so many players hold TBC in such high regard. It really captured lightning in a bottle, the perfect balance between accessibility and challenge, between casual and hardcore, between preserving what worked and innovating where it mattered. Karazhan remains one of the most beloved raids in World of Warcraft's history. Nagran still holds up as one of my favourite zones ever, and the arena system created an entire esports scene which is still going today. The Burning Crusade wasn't just an expansion, it was proof that World of Warcraft could evolve beyond what it was known to be. It could grow and it could continue to captivate millions of players across the world. It set the standard for what an mmorpg expansion should be, and its influence can still be felt in the game today. But eventually it came to an end, and as we closed the chapter on Outland, players were left wondering, how could Blizzard possibly top this? How could Blizzard go from strength to strength in this fashion? What could come next after such a monumental worldwide success? Well, we'll look at that next time as we find out just how Wrath of the Lich King changed World of Warcraft. The answer, as it would turn out, would surprise everyone and would take World of Warcraft to heights nobody could have predicted. So join me then and we'll continue to find out just how World of Warcraft evolved throughout each expansion. Shout out to boot.dev for sponsoring this video. You can check them out for free via the links below and get a start on back-end web development today. And with all that said, as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.